everyone. My name is Aiden, and this is Author Quest. Thank you so much for joining me today as I talk with my brother here.
I'm the brother.
It's not like I don't talk to you every day.
It's true. We talk too much, you might say, actually.
Cool. All right, I got a couple of things to talk about today. First thing, and we can only talk about it a little bit, Brendan. Just
Okay.
a little bit.
I don't know. I get on tangents, and I go.
Very briefly, and you can tee this up for a future video that you can do.
Oh, boy.
What were your thoughts on Ahsoka, the season finale? Spoiler warning for
Yes,
people who
big
haven't
spoiler
seen Ahsoka.
warning. We'll pause momentarily for the spoiler warning. So do you want my thoughts on just the season finale, or do you want my thoughts on the whole series?
Just, if you can get it in like 3 sentences.
I can get it in 3 words.
Okay.
It was garbage.
Dang.
So we were talking a little offline, but we'll continue. So there's just so many baffling decisions. It's actually a really good, honestly, if you're a writer, you should pay attention. You should watch it to learn what, not to do. Because there's so many baffling decisions that, a normal person maybe wouldn't, someone who's not paying attention to writing wouldn't maybe notice. So, we were talking about, if you removed Ahsoka and made Sabine the main character, which I would argue Sabine probably is the main character of the show, or Luke the main character or someone, nothing changes. Ahsoka is not essential to this storyline happening. You could replace her with any other character, and the story would mostly unfold the same way. You couldn't replace her with, Thrawn or Ezra, because obviously they're not there. But, anyone could go on the quest to find and stop Thrawn and save Ezra.
Yeah.
Nothing about it is truly requires her. So there's that. There's just a lot of very silly things. I won't get into all of it, but just some very the first 20 minutes of the episode were just slow. And I'm like, this is a season finale.
It should be.
Yeah, why are we,
so fast.
So they're at the, and again, spoiler warning, they're at the end where they are potentially going to get trapped on the planet if they don't get to Thrawn's ship and either stop him or at least get on the ship to leave. And they're just going slow for no reason.
To hover over the tiny little crab
Yeah,
things.
to save the little crab things, which makes no sense because they are native to this planet and they're not going to leave with you anyways. And then they crash the ship, and then Ezra goes, well, this is going to slow us down. And I'm like, you couldn't go much slower. And then they
start going faster.
Yeah, and then they go faster on the wolf things than they were in the ship. When they should have just gone. End of last episode, they jump in the ship and they go. You abandon the little shell creature things and you just go. Because time is of the essence. So it's just those kind of things, And then at the end...
It really felt... Or sorry, you finished.
Well, I was saying, and then at the end, they throw up Anakin's Force Ghost, which is... While it was great to see, it was very cheap because it didn't feel very earned. We had one episode where Ahsoka apparently learned some sort of lesson, which we still don't quite understand. But it wasn't like they went through this whole season. To earn having Anakin at the end really proud of her or looking over her, we needed to see her struggle with herself the whole time. And I don't feel like there was a little bit of that, but I don't feel like she made this huge leap from where she was in the beginning as a character to where she was at the end as a character.
Yeah, she was pretty flat the whole time.
There wasn't there was a little bit of a change after the middle. Little bit of a change.
She needed more PTSD hauntedness, you know, that she was dealing with. Like Doctor Who, the Ninth Doctor with Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah.
Needed some of that. But for me, the whole thing ended very weirdly.
Yes.
And it felt like the writers must have been dealing with some major writer's block, which is something I think that we all deal with, right? As writers. But I feel like they couldn't get out of it, and they got stuck with it, and then they had deadlines, and then a movie or a TV show was made that could have been way better.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings me on to my next topic, which is writer's block. I have a couple of unorthodox ways or tips or techniques to get out of writer's block that I use. But I was curious if you had any initial thoughts on how you get out of your writer's block. Are you in writer's block currently? All that.
Well, so I feel like if you're a creative, not even just a writer, you're always going to hit some sort of creative block. Whether you're a musician, whether you make films, whether you write, whatever. And I feel like you're always in an ebb and flow of that, and it's kind of impossible not to, because you have to, you know, you can only pull so much creativity out of yourself until you're going to hit a wall. And then you've got to wait a minute, you got to rest, you got to give your brain a moment, and then you kind of pick it up again. So everything kind of ebbs and flows. But the best way for me to work through writer's block that I've found is to read my story. So if I don't know how else to go, then either going back over my outline and not working on it, just read through what I've done, and then actually read through my prose, because you leave clues for yourself as you read of where you should go. So I've done this many times where it's like I'm writing, and then I'm like, gosh, I have no idea where to go with this. I don't know where this is leading. I've lost what the focus is. And then I'll go back and just start reading it basically from the beginning. And eventually, most of the time, I come across something that kind of like, kind of kicks you and gives you like we could go this way with it. I feel it's kind of like that scene in Lord of the Rings with Gandalf where they're in Moria and he doesn't know which way to go, and so they just sit there, and then finally he's like, it's that way. You know, like...
Oh, of course.
You know, I feel like that's how writer's block resolves. Is you're just like stuck. You're so stuck that all you can do is just sit in front of it and do nothing. And then finally you're just like, it's that way. You know?
Oh, it's so obvious.
So, that's kind of my go-to. There's a couple other things. One of the things I do too is I will just put it away, you know, go do something else, go to bed. Like, all those things are very good. Like, go sit out in the grass and chill for a minute.
But what happens if you are constantly putting it away and then you realize it's been like 2 years?
Well, so that's the trick, is you can... So one of the things I've been thinking to myself recently is, if I go do something like that, or if I put it away or whatever, I ask myself this question, which is, am I escaping from the work, or do I actually need this break?
Right.
You know?
I once heard it, are you escaping from something, or are you running towards something?
Well, and it's because you do need breaks. Like, we need, you know, you need to sit for a half hour and do nothing. You need to take those mental, like, we're way too connected in our world. Like, people scrolling social media, you know, our brains are constantly being fried with information. And so we need more of those breaks. But the question is, are you using the break because you actually need it, or are you using it to just not do the work, to procrastinate? And that's always the toughest question. And you can ask that question about anything. You can ask that about any of the work you do, whether it's just your job or any other creative endeavor or doing your dishes, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a couple of tips for you, Brendan. Some techniques.
Okay.
So I'll just present them to you, and if you let me know your thoughts.
I gotta say, my beard is like it's not even in the camera anymore.
Your beard's getting pretty.
Is this my wisdomous beard? Am I becoming Gandalf?
I've seen it longer only once, and that was a couple of years ago when you were. It was around Christmas time, and you were full on young Santa Claus.
I like it.
Good times. Okay, so here are some out-of-the-box ideas for beating writer's block.
Okay.
Number 1, write what one character thinks about another character. Okay? And this specifically, taking two characters that you haven't, that have maybe been introduced, have maybe come together, but don't necessarily have business thinking about each other in terms of the narrative. For instance, just getting into Lord of the Rings, right? Getting into Gimli's head and just writing what Gimli thinks about Merry.
Right.
That's it. Just like, man, that boy-man halfling smokes a lot. Right. Just whatever Gimli would think, that kind of stuff. Or what does your villain think of the main character's love interest, and just writing that out, like as either as a narrator or the actual character's, as the actual character's thoughts and feelings. That
it sounds to me kind of like just spending time with your characters. Right, or not even about what other characters, like what does your main character think about that flower, or this where they live, or what do they think about that group of people, or their job that they do,
or the mountains, or the job that they do,
like just writing their thoughts. And I think if you write it about other characters and then you kind of flip it around and that character writes about, that's a really great way to at least get to know because I do think I've run into this a lot where I'm writing and then I realize I get writer's block not because I don't have any creativity. I get writer's block because I don't know enough about what the world looks like. I don't know enough about how this culture functions. I don't know enough about what this character thinks about stuff. It's like a lack of information more than I'm just stuck and don't know what to do. So then if I stop and I spend time, like you're saying, where you're writing the history of the character or writing what the character thinks about certain things, it helps you get to know the character more and then move forward. Yeah.
And usually for me, when I do that, it just triggers some other stuff, maybe in my current, where I am in the book. But I'll just save those. So you use Notion, and you're really good at Notion. I do not. And so...
And it has confused your simple mind many times.
It has, however... so what I will do is when I'm writing, I just put it after what I'm currently writing, and then as I write, it just pushes everything down, and then when I'm like, this is the perfect spot for it, and then I'll flip it up, and then I'll keep writing and stuff. If this is my novel, I have a good this much of just stuff just ahead of it that I'm like, I could use that at some point. And it's not organized. It's like setups and payoffs and progresses.
Or just random ideas and...
It's just random ideas, but I have all of that in my head, but it's like I took it from my head and wrote it down.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's number one. That's how that's one way of getting out of writer's block. The second one, the second out of the box idea for beating writer's block is to write what a character thinks about an important person, place, or thing, which we already kind of talked about.
Yeah.
Just really getting into the mind of the character. The next one, and this is probably the one that I think is the best as an exercise, but you have the most fun with. And it's number 3, make your character commit an awkward mistake and recover. And it could be anything from, I think the most common one that I see is a character walks up and there's an NPC that's just yelling and is irate and all this stuff, and the character's like, ma'am, please calm down. Who you calling ma'am?
Right.
Like, and it's just like, oh, my man. It's just like, sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, things like that, or tripping, or falling, or drop the glass, you know, at a very embarrassing moment. You know, like you're meeting the queen and your sword falls out of its sheath. You know, something like that, just a little embarrassing. Because you get to see your character in an awkward social thing where they did mess up. You know, how do they react to that? Because if you had, say, like Brahm from Aragon, right? He's a strong mentor. He would be able to save face really quickly.
Right.
He'd be really elegant about it. Aragon, same book. It would go badly for Aragon.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's just
yeah.
it's a different way of exploring the character where, like what we were talking about before, is like they're talking about like what they think about certain things, but what you think about certain things and then what you actually do in your real life can be very different. So you can, I think that's a great way to like discover the two sides of your character, the kind of conscious and the subconscious, where it's like in their brain they act like or think that they would be super heroic, and then they get into a situation where they need to be heroic, and they're not heroic.
It does not work.
You know, so that is a really good
Right.
It's like two sides of the same coin kind of a thing.
And I think embarrassment specifically helps. It brings out a character's negative thoughts, you know, and how well do
Because then
do
they
that? What do
could
they
become
have to do?
self-deprecating. They could like they start put themselves down. They're trying to like they feel stupid. They all those kinds of things. Yeah.
It can put them in a bad mood, you know, and maybe you want your character in a bad mood. That'd be a great way to do it, you know. So yeah, so that's number 3.
Well, and that kind of too speaks to like one of the things you told me you always used to criticize my writing on very early on was like my characters never had any flaws. Like they would, like we just walked
Right.
through the story and everyone did everything perfectly how they were supposed to do it, you know.
Yep.
But you were constantly like, "Where's the flaws? Where's the flaws?" And that's a way to find them. Is like, how do they react in certain situations, or when their mother-in-law walks in the room, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that a terrifying thing? Like, what? How do they, you know, do they get choked
Right.
up and can't hardly speak, or do they get angry, or are they super happy? Like, what's their reaction to any of those types of events?
Right. Which actually comes into number 4, which is the fourth out-of-the-box way of getting out of writer's block is have your character attempt a new skill and fail. And the more necessary, the better.
Yeah.
You know, like you have to figure out how to pick a lock. Even though you can't, you have to figure out how to do it because it's your part of the plan. You have to be able to pick a lock.
Right.
And just show an epic failure of that, you know, or you have to make a sword, you know.
Yeah, well, you see that a lot in like fantasy and stuff. That's pretty common because, like, in my story, for example, especially in the first book, there's kind of a certain type of magic that's being birthed for the first time, and so that's gonna put the main character in like they go from not having these powers to having them, but there's no one around to teach her because it's new.
Right.
So she is the one who has to figure it out. It's like the first person having these powers kind of a thing. And then, yeah, it becomes like you basically end up in that situation constantly of how do you do this? How do I do that? You know, imagine like the very first wizard in the Harry Potter world.
Figuring it out.
You know, Confundio, maybe. You know, like, how do they come up with the spells and the things that they do? Or how do they build a sword?
order all the
you know?
hijinks.
Like, I've never built a sword. I don't, you know.
I'm sure you'd fail.
I probably would.
You know. And I think that's a great way to also to have like some negative effects. If you need something to happen in the plot, but you want it to be your character's fault, just link it to maybe an innocent failure, you know? So, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, do this as an exercise, and then you'll start thinking about your characters in a different way.
Yeah.
And
I would like to do, just because you do these exercises, they don't have to become part of your story.
No.
Even the flaws you come up with, or even the things you discover, they don't have to become part of it either. It's just a way to find new directions to go. You know.
And I think you get into the minds of your characters better, so that when something like that comes up, you know how they would react in that situation already. And you may not even realize that you're doing it. You're just like, this is how they would react in that situation,
right.
You know? And then the fifth out-of-the-box idea for beating writer's block, I have what would be good news and what would be bad news for your character to hear right now. Somebody walks into the room,
declare something.
News, and it could be anything from the Archduke cupcakes were burnt in the oven.
Right.
What are we going to do? Or it could be, I just found out I'm going to be a father.
Right.
And it's some other character.
Right.
You know, like, what would that look like?
Then that could be an interesting exercise for your villain. Because, like, news would be different to different people. So, like, you know, the cupcakes being burnt is going to be bad news to the baker, but it could be good news to the baker's competition, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And if you want to figure out where you want to go with the plot, this could be a really great way. Write one scene where the villain gets good news or the villain gets bad news. They're the same thing, just different. Just try it out, see which one you like, you know? That would probably be really good for pantsers, you know?
Yeah.
So...
Which I do some pantsing, but I'm much more of an outliner these days. I pants
same.
my way through the outline.
I really like having a plan for everything, and I usually break that down into like elements and stuff. Like so my channel is primarily about archetypes. That's the big thing that I explore and stuff. But it's all about breaking stories down into their elements. Like, what are they?
Right.
And recently, I've been doing prose, and so breaking down prose into its different elements. Because when I was in school, I remember learning the structure of a sentence. I don't remember learning how to construct a good sentence. To convey things.
Yeah. You learn the basic rules, but not how to do it well.
Right. Like you learn which one is the verb,
right.
Which one is the adverb. You don't learn take two sentences side by side. This is a good sentence. This is the better version.
But they
of the
say
sentence.
the same thing.
But they say the same thing. Maybe it's flowery words. Maybe it's whatever. But it's like this tells the point. Or even better yet, a paragraph. Like this sentence plus this sentence plus this sentence. Same information, but over here it's told better.
Right.
You know. So I didn't learn that, and maybe they did teach that. You know, I'm going to give my English teachers the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention in English class, but I don't know who else was. Yeah, I've been trying to figure out how to break prose down into its different elements, because that way you learn what you're working with. So I think I've narrowed it down, Brendan. I think I've narrowed it down to 6 elements of prose. Okay? So let me know if you think that there's more, if I'm missing something.
If it's all crap.
Let me know your thoughts.
It's all crap.
If it's all crap. It very well could be. Okay, so the 6 elements of prose. Number 1, description. Okay, so you're describing things, and whoever's describing it, they are describing it. The next one is inquisition. So asking questions. It could be an interior wonder. It could be the narrator begging the question to the reader, that kind of thing. Number 3, reflection. Okay, so this is your character. Something happened to the character. The character recalls that thing and then reflects on it and forms their opinion or their view of it.
Or plan or whatever,
Whatever it is. Yep. Number 4, revelation. So, learning something. There is now new information given. Okay. The next one is action. Somebody does X. They swing the sword. Okay. And then the last one is expression. Okay. So expression is an action based on your reflection. Right?
Okay.
So I don't know all of these things, and if there is like an actual list of like the elements of prose out there, somebody please type it in the comments and let me know. Send us a link, something.
Well, I think there's 2 ways of looking at prose. There's the like technical way. You're looking at it more though as the story way.
Right.
So what was the first one again? Let's talk about that one.
The first one was description.
Yeah. So I think this is where most writers don't have too much of an issue, because I think it's the easiest one. It's the easiest thing to start with, of like, especially if you're doing fantasy and everything is, you have to explain everything. It's really easy for your writing to be like 80% description. The building looked like this.
Right.
The stones were white. The sword was long and made of steel. Like all of those things are natural and easy for you to put in. But it is an essential part of, you have to have description in your prose, especially if you do fantasy. If you do historical fiction or you do something like that, it's in the real world. Less description is required to understand what it looks like. Whereas in fantasy or sci-fi or otherworldly stuff, if you don't tell them, they don't know what it looks like. Like, they don't know what they're supposed to imagine. It's like, you write a character for 20 chapters and realize you never said it was a dwarf. So... Right. And so they would never...
Changes the context.
Yeah, they would never know that it's a dwarf or an elf or something until you actually tell them that. And then... So it's essential. The question is, how do you do it well without boring people?
And that's where you always hear show, don't tell. If you... Like, the tell part is description. But there's 5 other elements that are all about show.
Right, and actually, if we can have a slight tangent, I've decided that I push back pretty hard against the show don't tell thing, and the reason is
that's a spicy take.
So I'm gonna spicy take coming here soon. I don't believe in show don't tell, and the reason I don't believe in it. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have show don't tell. Obviously, you need that. I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying is, I feel like we put too much emphasis on it. Every single book, like, I think this is hard. This is a hard take for me to explain.
You're gonna have to defend yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to do that. So if you look at something like Lord of the Rings or like older literary works, they're much slower. There's lots of description. They're just like, reading The Hobbit, there's action, but it's not all show don't tell. There's a lot of telling in old books like that, in older stories. I feel like the emphasis on show don't tell comes from the fact that our modern society is so fast-paced, and we want our movies fast-paced. We want our books fast paced. Like everything has to be fast, and everything has to show you and not tell you. But sometimes it's okay. Like I guess my real point is we've become afraid of just telling. Sometimes you just need to tell, and that's okay.
Just just have a character tell a story about the history of the world, and it's okay.
Yeah. Like it's just not like I like that stuff. If I read a book and I get into a bit of telling, I don't go, ugh, I like that stuff,
Right.
And especially like Lord of the Rings is the most famous example of it. You read the beginning of The Hobbit and it's like concerning hobbits. And then it's just like a chapter about nothing other than just telling you what hobbits are. And it's endlessly fascinating.
Yep.
There's no showing. It's mostly all telling. Like hobbits do this. Hobbits don't like wet, grimy holes. They live in good, clean places. That means comfort.
Comfy homes.
They look like this, and they eat this kind of food. And he's just telling you about the hobbits, and everyone loves it. So that's my point. I'm not saying, obviously you need to show things, and you need it. I'm not saying that the advice isn't invalid. I'm just saying we put so much emphasis on it, and it's unnecessary.
Right. It's like the new trendy thing.
And now here comes me being destroyed by the comments.
Yeah.
This is going to be a short that you put out that I'll just get destroyed in, but that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
Here. I got to go close a blind really quick, so keep people entertained.
Okay. Everyone go to Pokemon Quest. Me and my daughter do Pokemon stuff. We have a whole family of Quest
really
YouTube
fun.
channels. Author Quest, Writing Quest, Gamers Quest, Pokemon Quest, Film Quest. Check them out. So back to where we were. I talked a lot about Show Don't Tell there with my spicy take, but I don't know where we were before that.
So we just talked about description, like how there's... If I'm right and there's 6 elements of prose, there's description, inquisition, reflection, revelation, action, and expression. There's description is just one of the 6, and that's the tell of the show don't tell, right? So the next one is inquisition. So you need to have somebody somewhere asking questions, which also implies that you need to have information that people don't know.
Yes.
Okay. So there's the subtext.
And you have to have a reason for the character to want to learn that information.
Right.
And that's where I would point to, Abby Emmons always talks about internal conflict. And so, and actually this ties to Ahsoka. So I was talking about how, you could replace her, you could put any other character in there and replace her, and the story would be the same. And this is what that is. There's information to learn, to know. This character needs to find that information, but there has to be an internal reason for the character to want this information. And it has to be specific to your main character, because, in Ahsoka, they want to find Ezra because he's their friend. Well, that applies to all of them.
Right.
It doesn't apply to just Ahsoka. So there's no reason for Ahsoka to go on the journey alone. To go on the... You know what I mean?
Right.
I like Greatest Showman. There's information... he's trying to get to a certain place, but it can only be him.
Right.
Because
he is the greatest showman.
Yeah, it's directly tied to his circumstance, because he wants to make something of himself and he feels like a failure, and so if he doesn't make something of himself, then he will fail at life. That's his internal conflict. He has to prove himself. And so, but his wife doesn't feel that way, and his kids don't feel that way, and the people that work for him don't feel that way, and Zac Efron's character doesn't feel that way. It's only his character feels that way, so therefore the story happens to him.
Right.
Do you understand? It's a very distinct thing, but in Ahsoka, the challenge is we all love Ezra and we want to save Ezra. And we want to stop Thrawn because Thrawn's bad. That applies to everyone.
Yeah, everybody wants that thing.
Right.
It would,
So it doesn't make you care specifically about Ahsoka, I guess.
yeah. Dang,
I
just had...
throw it.
Well, so here's the thing, is like I have a lot of thoughts on Ahsoka, but this episode is not about Ahsoka.
Yeah, but that's just a good example. You know, you could go to, like, back to Lord of the Rings. Like Aragorn has, like, the journey of him becoming the king of Gondor can only happen to him. It can't happen to Boromir. It can't happen to Faramir. It only happens to him, and his fear is, I don't know if I'm worthy. I don't know if I can do this. You know, or I don't know. Like the fall of man happened in my line. I don't want to be the one who continues that.
Right.
Well, Boromir doesn't have that. Denethor doesn't have that. Like it's just him. Same with Frodo. Like his journey is his journey. Like so. That's why you care about those characters actually going on their specific quests.
Right. It's almost like, sorry, this is a whole other tangent, but I just had a theory. So everyone's theorizing that Anakin is now the new father character, and then Ahsoka's the daughter, and then
From the Mortis gods.
from the Mortis gods, and then Ezra's the son, right? If that's true, that's great. Love that. That'd be awesome. But to tell that story, instead, it would be better if Ahsoka's call to action was Anakin coming to her
Yes.
first.
Now it's specific to her.
Now it's her. It has to be you. You have to stop Thrawn. It can't be anybody else.
Well, but it should come about. So what Ahsoka really should have been about, the main thread of it, and I think this is what they tried to do, but it just didn't quite happen. She should have been trying to reconcile her past. That's the story. I am the apprentice of Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And her dealing with that tragedy. And then somehow that translates into finding Ezra. But they kind of, instead of that being the main story thread, they just kind of added it as a bit of a side story thread that kind of happened to her. Like, you know, she dies and then falls into the world between worlds, and then it happens. But
Right.
up until that point, it's not part of the story. So
Where she needed to realize, no, you're not the apprentice of Darth Vader. You're the apprentice of Anakin.
yes, it's a slight shift that's subtle, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Man, I'm really getting a glare on my face right now. Look at that. You see that?
You're fine.
So, yeah, that would be a much better way to do Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Man,
that's a whole
That's a whole video, man.
that's a whole thing, but it's a good example of some things. So,
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. Continuing onwards. How much time we got?
yeah, we got a few minutes.
We got a few minutes, yeah. So, description, inquisition, like asking those questions, reflection, revelation, action, and expression. Part of the reason, like, I think that we could go deeper into these, and I probably will at some point. But for the sake of time, I'm going to get into this next part about it. The description, in my head, this is the order that it happens in. And you can skip it, right? You can skip bits. But there's description. You ask a question about it. You reflect on it. You have a revelation. You do something about it. And you express something about it. You know what I mean?
And to me, that feels similar to the Dan Harmon story circle.
Right. But it applies
but
to the
it's-
actual elements in the words, you know.
It applies to how you actually write the story. So you're writing this. So I understand what you're saying. So you start with description, you go through all these different things, and then you come back to description, but you're in like 15 chapters later.
Right.
And then you do it again. Like, so it's this kind of cyclical thing through the story.
Right. And even, you know, the Abby Emmons scene cards, right? So if you're thinking...
I built them into my Notion template.
Well, there you go.
I have lots of videos about it, actually.
Oh, well, great. So I think that it could even be in a beat of a story, you know, in like the cycle of prose is just constantly happening.
Yeah.
And it's happening for different characters, you know, but yeah, think about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about, you know, because like the scene cards are like, you have the setup, and then you have the tension, and then you have a bit of a crossroads, and then you have the decision and the outcome.
Right.
So, like, again, it's a cyclical, which the reason I latched onto that, and I think actually this works for this prose thing too, is it keeps everything moving well. You know, like her scene cards are designed to like keep pushing you into the, like, makes you want to read the next chapter, because you're doing this cycle of like setting things up, asking a big question, and then getting to the next setup and asking a question. It's just this constant cycle. But I think what you're saying is, like, if you can also do that with the actual prose as well, you can add even more of that keeping people reading.
Well, it's not so, it's keeping people reading, but it's understanding how to execute it really well. So when I work with archetypes, plot archetypes, you know, I with all of the stuff, when you're working with those, they're beats, and you say this happens and this happens and this happens, and the character thinks this and then does that, right?
Right.
With these elements of prose, in theory, you could take a chapter that you've outlined, say, right? You know what's going to happen in this chapter. You know that they're going to be in the big city. There's going to be a battle that breaks out, and there's going to be this character and this character in it, right? In theory, you could take, what are all the elements that I have to describe here? So I need a description of the city. I need a description of the people that are fighting us. I need the action of what actually happens. I need the character to think this about it. You know, like, what are they reflecting about it? What are the questions that they ask? And you can write all those down.
It's kind of like a checklist of what you need to have in the prose, and then you can actually come up with all those things beforehand and then plug them in.
Right. You could literally write the prose out as you normally would when writing, and then you could just piece it all together. So
I like this.
Right? So before you're even like, okay, I need to sit down and write this chapter, you already have the noble language of Anakin sprung from his seat and he slashed down the battle droids. You already know that you need that part. It's just
so just write it already.
Already.
Yeah, so okay, because so one of the things that I struggle with, and maybe this solves my problem, is just sitting down to like write linearly can be hard. But if I'm like, okay, I need this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece, I need this piece of dialogue, I need this thing to happen, you can just write those all individually, put them in order, and then glue them together.
Yep.
It's a lot more of a systematized way to, you might have just changed my life, Aiden.
So if you take archetypes, right? So I breaking down stories into archetypes and all of their plot points. This is essentially taking each plot point and breaking it down into all of their individual beats.
Yes.
Of the story. And
then you're breaking down those story beats into, these are the prose elements that need to be in there.
This is the language that I want to use.
Whoa. Having a brain baby.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm telling you, I'm not crazy. And I looked around. I haven't seen anything like this before. So It's still all developing. Let us know down in the comments what you guys think.
Yeah. Sorry, our thoughts on it are a little vague because this is kind of my first time I'm encountering this idea.
But and that's kind of the point, is like, this is an underdeveloped thought process, and I'm going to do a lot more research, and I'm going to be making more videos about it, because it is changing the way that I think about prose. Because, you know, when you're doing your character, when you have a plot and you have your character sheets, right, and you have their arcs maybe or whatever, and you're like, well, this character is a 42-year-old male blacksmith. His wife died in the war. You know, that thing. Why not just write? I want to have a description. I want to have him saying how his wife died.
Right.
In his words.
So you can just write that.
And then you just write that.
And then decide where to plug it in.
Exactly. And you can label it one of these 6 elements. And then later you can just be like, well, I need a description for a thing. You go to your character, you click on the description. I'm just thinking like how I would organize this as in my internal wiki. Like,
yeah. Aiden, you might have changed the writing game, not gonna lie. Kind of blowing my mind up. So, yeah, we're gonna have to talk about this more. But we are running out of time. So,
oh yeah, we are running out of time.
Let's wrap it up for this one. So you have some stuff for sale.
Yes, as you can see behind me, I have been publishing my character plots, my character plot archetypes. So it's not just the descriptions, but it's also the most common plot points that you would see in different character archetypes. I mean, I've got everything from the Avenger, the Smuggler, the con artist, the Wildman. I have the artist. You know, there's so many of them, and they really do all follow a trend. And not to say that you can't change them, like they aren't malleable. But if you want to write the anti-hero, there's a very clear way to make them an anti-hero. And like to the point of they aren't an anti-hero without certain aspects. What are those aspects? And I put them all together, and you can find them on my Gumroad store.
Nice. Which will be a link down below, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Brendan, for coming. This has been Author Quest. Make sure you subscribe and comment down below, everybody that's watching. Thank you
definitely.
for giving us the time.
I want to hear some comments. I want to know what people think about this whole prose idea, because I need to know how I think about it. So I need them to tell me what I think about it.
I'm just waiting until like someone's like, duh, it's this theory that was made by this person in the 1820s or something like that.
We think we're mind-blowing, and then someone's like, you guys are idiots. I'm like, sorry.
Which just goes to show that we're on a quest to become authors, you know?
Yeah.
Like we're still there.
That is the truth. Cool.
All right. Well, I will see you later. Huzzah!
Huzzah!